And we're on to a new chapter. Not yet a new subject. We still have more to learn about the beinoni. We still want to get to know the beinoni better. So let's just recap a little bit, because chapter 13 really continues where chapter 12 left us off. So, all right, l'chaim, everyone. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol v'dvari. And here we go. So, the Alter Rebbe introduces us to three characters. There's a tzaddik, there's the rasha, and then there's the beinoni, somebody in between. And the tzaddik and the rasha are very, very easy people to understand. A tzaddik is somebody who's righteous, holy, only has a godly soul, has no evil within him. He only knows good, so he only does good. He only knows holy, so he only does holy. His life is very not complex. That's a tzaddik. And then we have a rasha. A rasha is also very easy to understand. He's very human. He's got a godly soul, and therefore he sometimes does godly stuff. He has an animal soul, so he sometimes does animal stuff. The rasha is just human. He has moments of strength, moments of weakness. But a rasha is somebody who is weak. They lapse. They give in. That's what makes the rasha a rasha. But then there's a beinoni. And a beinoni is already a lot more nuanced. Because on the one hand, the beinoni is no rasha. Never fails, never falters. At the same time, he's not a tzaddik. So, the beinoni is in this very, very subtle in-between space. On the one hand, he is human just like anybody else. He's got an animal soul, which has negativity, which has evil. And he could relate to the temptation, to the desire for evil. He may even desire it. In that regard, the beinoni is very similar to a rasha. How are they that different? But the beinoni somehow has tremendous control, has tremendous power, and that power enables him to have absolute, consistent control. The animal soul never gets the beinoni to lose, to have that moment of weakness manifest. And the beinoni holds strong that at least in conscious life, in behaviors, in thought, or in speech, or in action, this beinoni is strong. And he even looks like a tzaddik from that perspective. So from the outside, the beinoni looks like a tzaddik. From the inside, he looks like a rasha. And that's basically the essential definition of the beinoni. Now, we discussed a lot more things in chapter 12. We spoke about the importance of inspiration for the beinoni. The beinoni is not just somebody who has a lot of stamina. Stamina has to come from somewhere. Willpower has to come from somewhere. And the beinoni is able to maintain this consistency by what we call the daily soul exercise, right? And conventionally, it's called prayer, davening. Davening is an emotional experience, or at least that's what it should be. And that gives the beinoni a daily recharge, a daily inspirational boost that he could live with. And the lingering effect of the prayer, that little spark of energy carries him through the day and gives the beinoni the inspiration and the willpower and the spiritual stamina to never give in. Then there's one more point I want to remind you before we move on to the new chapter. The Alter Rebbe told us the two keys, the two advantages that the godly soul has over the animal soul. There are two advantages that allow the godly soul to always win the battle over the animal soul. One is neurological and one is spiritual. Neurologically, this is not a spiritual concept. This is very practical. Being human means that your mind rules over your heart. Animals, the heart rules over the mind. The desire, the impulse, leads the body. Humans, mind over heart. The mind will always rule over the heart if it only chooses to do so. So there's a natural power that gives one control over the animal soul, and the animal soul can never overcome that larger power, which is the mind. And the mind is the main tool of the godly soul. The godly soul is defined by its intellect. So we could use our intellect, our willpower, the willpower of our mind, to put a screeching halt to any of the temptations or desires or impulses that are coming from the heart. That was the first one. Remember that? Mind over heart. Very, very important. This is a key idea in Tanya, a key idea in Chassidus. You never lose control. You maybe give up control. But the heart is never a force that we don't have the power to reel in. Okay. What was the second special power that the godly soul has over the animal soul? This was already a little bit more of a spiritual concept. That the supremacy of the godly soul over the animal soul is like the supremacy of light over dark. That a little bit of light dispels a lot of darkness. And it dispels it immediately and spontaneously and effortlessly. And so too, the godly soul has the power of light, of wisdom. That in the face of the godly soul, the animal soul just melts away. It loses all of its strength. So these are two ideas I want you to remember. What is the strength that the beinoni is tapping into? Number one, the strength that the mind will always have power over the heart. And just because the heart wants something doesn't mean that you are now a prisoner to that desire, but the opposite. You have full control of if you're going to listen to this desire or if you want to reject this desire. And number two, the godly soul is light. It's radiant. And the animal soul is dark, foolish. And light, a little bit of light dispels a lot of darkness. Okay, that was chapter 12 on one foot. That leads us to chapter 13. We'll continue to learn about the beinoni. I named this chapter the vulnerability of the beinoni. A very big theme of this chapter is that the Alter Rebbe wants the beinoni to be very self-aware of his or her limitations. You have to know your weaknesses. And if you're not in touch with your weaknesses, sometimes it could come back to hurt you. Right? The point of being aware of your weaknesses is not so that you could berate yourself and give yourself a hard time and make yourself feel bad, but the opposite. In order to be strong, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to know your weaknesses. You have to know who you are. In Chassidus, in the Chassidic lifestyle, and the spirituality of Chassidus, of the Chabad teachings, being honest with yourself is a very big value. Knowing your place. Knowing your place on a spiritual level. Being very self-aware of who you really are, not fooling yourself. And the Alter Rebbe had, if you want to call it an obsession or a love of truth. The Alter Rebbe loved truth. The Alter Rebbe loved integrity and honesty. And the Alter Rebbe demanded that from his Chassidim, to be very, very honest, very authentic, and not to delude yourself. And you see that in Tanya. The whole model of Tanya. No, don't worry. Okay. The whole model of Tanya. Come on, don't worry. You got it. You're good. Is this last year's here? There you go. Don't worry. Have a good one. The whole model of Tanya is it's not a cheap book. It's not little sound bites. It's not little inspirational pieces. Tanya is very deep and it's a real system, because the Alter Rebbe really wants to get down to the bottom of things. The Alter Rebbe wants truth and integrity and honesty. And that's going to be the message over here. The vulnerability of the beinoni. Okay. So let's begin learning. We are on the handout I sent out to you this morning. It is not the entire chapter. Unfortunately, didn't have a chance to finish that on time, as happens often. It's page 111, chapter 13, the vulnerability of the beinoni. Here we go. Part 1, God breaks the stalemate in the beinoni. Okay, now, I don't expect of any of you to remember this, but a little bit over a year ago, when we started learning Tanya together, we started with chapter 1. Anybody remember what it said in chapter 1? It's a long time ago. By the way, it wouldn't be a bad idea to go back and just at least read briefly. You don't have to spend too much time, but just to refresh yourself on everything. Start from chapter 1. I don't think it'll take you more than a half hour to just read it once, maybe just once. If you want, you can do it twice. Just read exactly what it says on the pages. Just to read again from the beginning of Tanya, just like that, you have it in your memory, to jog your memory again of what we learned. But chapter 1 was full of questions. The Alter Rebbe brought us a bunch of quotes from all throughout the Talmud that spoke about the soul and the beinoni and our mission in life. Very good, Paulina. Yeah, to be a tzaddik and not be a rasha. And the Alter Rebbe didn't answer any of those questions yet. The Alter Rebbe just brought up a bunch of questions, and we're already at chapter 13 and no answers yet. Chapter 13, for the first time, the Alter Rebbe is going to start bringing us back to those texts and to those questions that he introduced to us 12 chapters ago, and he'll start now revealing to us the light, what was really going on over there. So we'll begin with our first one. Let's read. The Alter Rebbe says, now we can understand the language that our sages use in the teaching cited earlier in chapter 1. It's from the Talmud. The Talmud says that in the beinonim, both are judging them, meaning both the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, and the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Teaching from the Talmud. The Talmud first says a tzaddik, only the Yetzer Tov, only the evil inclination judges the tzaddik. But in a beinoni, he has two judges, the Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara. Let's continue. The Talmud cites a proof for this teaching. As the verse says, it's a verse from Psalms. He, God, will stand to the right of the destitute person to save him from those who judge his soul. So the Talmud says, look at this verse. The verse says God is saving the destitute person from those who judge his soul, in the plural. It doesn't say from the judge of his soul, in the singular. The verse itself implies there's two judges. Mishoftei nafsho, that's plural. So the Talmud learns out there are two judges to the beinoni. Okay. The Alter Rebbe brought this text in chapter 1, but now we could really appreciate how in such a small statement, the Talmud captures the whole identity of the beinoni. Let's continue reading. After learning about the beinoni in the previous chapter, We can now appreciate the Talmud's precise choice of wording, that the beinoni has two internal judges, the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. Now, dear friends, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page over here. Are you all familiar with the terms Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov? Good inclination and evil inclination? So this is a pretty classical Jewish concept, that every person has two Yetzers, inclinations. An inclination to do good and an inclination to do evil or to do bad. And in Tanya, we can understand it within the rubric of Tanya, that the Yetzer Tov, the good inclination, is the inclination of the godly soul, right? And the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is the inclination that stems from the animal soul, right? So the Talmud uses these words. The beinoni is judged by two. The Alter Rebbe points out, says, why does the Talmud use the word judge? A person is judged by their two inclinations. Judged is a funny word, no? You could say a person is influenced by these two inclinations. What does it mean, judged? The Alter Rebbe says the word judged captures the entire identity of the beinoni. Let's read. The Alter Rebbe says, note that they did not say both are ruling. The sages of the Talmud did not say that both inclinations are ruling in the beinoni, for that would imply, that the Yetzer Hara does actually have some real control over his behavior. Heaven forbid. Ruling means you get to call shots. Ruling means you're doing something here. You're in the driver's seat. So the Talmud doesn't say that, because the beinoni does not have an evil inclination that rules. Rather, the sages say, both are judging. That the Yetzer Hara merely judges the beinoni internally, voicing its opinion. Key difference. A ruler means you're in charge. A judge is a very high position. But we all know that judges, you know what judges get to do? Judges get to give opinions. Now, some of these opinions ultimately end up becoming law, but not automatically. Not automatically. A judge's opinion could be a dissenting opinion, could be a minority opinion. And if it's a minority opinion, it'll be printed in books, it'll sit on bookshelves, but it's gonna remain as an opinion. It's not gonna be something that's acted upon, that's in practice. So the Alter Rebbe says that's the key of a beinoni. A beinoni has two judges, but not two rulers. And the Alter Rebbe explains why that can't be. Let's continue. For after all, when the Yetzer Hara has any executive control over the body, the small city, even for a brief moment, at that instant, that person is considered a Rasha, not a beinoni. It can't be that the Yetzer Hara could be a ruler in the beinoni, because the moment that the Yetzer Hara could rule in the beinoni, he's not a beinoni anymore. He's a Rasha. Right? All it takes is one moment of weakness, and you're not a beinoni anymore. So the beinoni doesn't have a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination, as a ruler. He has him only as a judge. And the Talmud captures this nuance in such a precise choice of words. The beinoni is judged by two Yetzers, by two inclinations. It's all in the word judged. And the author is gonna flesh this idea out a little bit more. Let's read. We're on the top of page 112. Rather, in the beinoni, the Yetzer Hara is compared to a judge who sits on a case with two other judges and states his opinion. Right? Every judge is entitled to an opinion. Okay. But the Alter Rebbe is going to say the obvious. But regardless of what he says, it is always possible that the final ruling will come out otherwise, since there's another judge on the case that may dissent with his opinion. What happens when you have two dissenting judges? What do you need then? You got to have a third judge. You got to have an odd number. So the Alter says, so if you have two dissenting judges, then a third judge is required to mediate, right? The arbiter. And the law goes according to the opinion of the mediator. The third judge is the one who ultimately gets to choose which opinion is going to be the majority and which opinion is going to be the minority. That's the nature of a judge. No judge gets to decide what's going to happen. Each judge only gets to give an opinion. Let's continue. The same is here. The Yetzer Hara first expresses its opinion in the left ventricle of the heart. He's a judge. He gets to share an opinion. From the heart, this opinion rises to the brain for consideration. That's how it works. We wake up in the morning, we have stimuli, and our animal soul gets stimulated. What stimulates our animal soul? There can be lots of forms of stimulation. The snooze button is a form of stimulation. Each of us have what our animal soul has to grapple with during the day. So first there's the temptation in the heart. From the heart, that signal gets sent to the brain. Now let's think about it. Let's consider it. Let's plan it. But immediately the second judge dissents. As soon as that signal reaches the brain, the godly soul pops up and says, no! Animal soul wants this. I don't want that. I give another opinion. The second judge, let's continue reading. The second judge is the divine soul who resides in the brain and extends itself outward to the right ventricle of the heart, which is the residence of the Yetzer Tov. So the Alter Rebbe says, this is what's going on. We have two judges, a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov, a good inclination and an evil inclination. They each have opposing views. We're at a stalemate. So what happens now? This is how the Alter Rebbe continues. How was the dispute resolved? The final practical ruling is according to the mediator. And this third mediating judge is none other than the Holy One, blessed be He, who comes to the aid of the Yetzer Tov, of the good inclination. As our sages say, if it weren't that the Holy One, blessed be He, comes to your aid, you wouldn't be able to overcome the Yetzer Hara. So the Alter says something which is extremely fascinating. And there's really a lot of depth here. We could really discuss this. The Alter says that were we humans to be purely objective, we would be in perpetual confusion. We would be incapacitated. We wouldn't be able to budge. You know why? Because animal soul says this, godly soul says that. And it wouldn't let us do anything. We have two opposing forces. Now the problem is that we're also very subjective people, so we usually tend to listen to our animal soul more than our godly soul. But essentially, we humans are at a stalemate. There are two opinions, and who gets to call the shots? So the Alter Rebbe says it's God who calls that shot. And the way it works is that God stands at the aid of our godly souls and give our godly souls the power to overcome the animal soul. It's a very powerful piece of Talmud. The Talmud says that if it weren't for God's help, we would never be able to overcome. We would always succumb to the force of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination. Okay, what is the form of help that God gives us? What's this aid? So the Alter Rebbe says, what is this aid? It is the glow that God's light shines upon the divine soul. Last chapter we spoke about how the godly soul is light. And a little bit of light dispels a lot of darkness. You know where that light comes from? That's God's gift to us. Now whenever we need it, we get a little bit of God's light, which allows us to dispel the darkness and the confusion of the animal soul. This radiance provides the divine soul its advantage and dominance over the foolishness of the fool, which is the Yetzer Hara, just as the dominance of light over darkness, as explained above. So there we have it. In a beinoni, on the one hand, if you would look at who gets to rule the beinoni, the animal soul doesn't rule the beinoni. The opposite. The animal soul never even gets one moment of expression in the beinoni's life. But he's a judge. He gets to give a lot of opinions. He's always pushing to get his voice heard. And if it weren't for God, we wouldn't be able to overcome that. So this is both a very inspiring idea. It's also a very humbling idea. We have to realize this. Every single time that we, in our lives, are successful in choosing the godly soul over the animal soul, we have to know that God helped us do it. And that if not for God's help, we would have failed. It's very inspiring. God is always there with you. Every single time that you need that assistance, He's always giving it to you on a daily basis, whenever you need it. It's not like God only shows up for, when you're in real deep, big trouble. Every single day in the life of a Jew, God is there at your right side giving assistance to your soul. So it's very inspiring. It's also very humbling. It's humbling to know, like people say, I've got this, I got this. I can manage this. We could not manage it. We cannot. We don't have it. We don't got it. We, left to our own devices, would fail miserably. We have no power over our animal soul. And the fact that we don't succumb to our animal soul automatically, and that we always have the power to overcome and to choose our godly soul, that's only because God is giving us the strength that we don't even possess on our own. So it's inspiring and very humbling. For those of you who are familiar with the world of recovery from addiction, there's a 12-step program. What are the first 2 steps? Step number 1 is that we need to acknowledge our powerlessness. We need to acknowledge the limitations of our power and that we cannot help ourselves. That's step number 1. Step number 1 of the 12 steps is acknowledging your powerlessness. Yeah, your powerlessness. How vulnerable you are. What's step 2? Recognizing that there's a power that's larger than you that could help you. That's literally what the author was telling us over here. A beinoni has to know, a Jew has to know, that any success that he has is really not his own success. It is your success, but you couldn't have done it on your own. On your own, I'm powerless. It's God who's always standing with me every single day, on my right side, giving that support to me. Okay, now I want to share with you something before we move on forward. Let's process what we've learned over here. There are 3 judges, and this bench is very predictable. It's 2-1, right? God is always going to vote like the godly soul. So this would seem to imply that the animal soul the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, should be losing, a whole day. Do our lives look like that? The way it is on paper and practically, there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect, huh? We know that actually our animal soul, our Yetzer Hara, gets a lot of victories throughout the day. So where is God a whole day if he's there being the third judge? So we have to understand this properly. Look again at the very beginning of this chapter. The Talmud cites a proof for this teaching. What does the verse say? He, God, will stand to the right of the destitute person to save him. God stands on the side. God doesn't take away our free choice. God only comes to the assistance of our godly soul when we choose to put that effort in to have the godly soul win. So if we only want to put in the effort, God will always be there to assist us. But God is not going to impose his help upon us. That wouldn't be fair. Gail says, why not? That's the way it is. That's the way it is. But God is always there to help us. But the first move we need to make. So really, we have to be the first ones to say, you know what? I'm not going to give in. I want to win. I don't want to lose today. And then God helps. But that's always the way it works. You have to begin first. Our sages speak about this so much. God is always there to help, and God can do the infinite for you. But you need to make the first step. There's no free lunch. You have to make that choice. That choice of clarity. What do I want? I told you last class. I want to repeat it again because it's a beautiful teaching. I read this in a letter from the Rebbe. That the Rebbe wrote to somebody who was going through a challenge. And the Rebbe responded to this person that very often when we face a challenge in life, these challenges seem like very big deals. And they seem very daunting and very overwhelming and very scary and too much to tackle. And we get very scared, very intimidated, very overwhelmed. But the Rebbe says so often in life what happens is that these big problems that we thought are so beyond us, once we actually started dealing with it, it all fell into place actually pretty easily. We realized it wasn't such a big deal. So before we jumped into the deep end, it looked like it's too big. Then once we started, all of a sudden, it was smooth. It all worked out. It wasn't that overwhelming. It wasn't that big of a deal. That's the way it works. God only steps in to give us a hand after we make that first move. At the beginning, it looks overwhelming. You want to know why it looks overwhelming? Because it is overwhelming. But once we start, it all falls into place because God is there to assist us. We have a power. We have the aid of a higher force, of a higher power. And everything falls into place. So this is the beinoni. What did we learn? We learned the idea of how the beinoni has two judges. He has an animal soul. That animal soul is alive and well and kicking. The only thing is that the beinoni gets to control the animal soul, and the real truth is he only gets to control the animal soul not because of his own successes, but because God is always there to give him that boost, that third vote, that gift of light that allows him to dispel the darkness of the animal soul. And with that, we move on to part 2 of the chapter on page 113. How are we doing so far? Doing good? Okay, let's continue. And here the Alter Rebbe gets to the next point. Part 2, know your weakness so that you can stay strong. And this brings us to the very first question of the Tanya. In chapter 1. And Paulina, I'm so impressed. You remember this. I'm shocked, actually. I do not think anybody's going to remember this. The very beginning of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe brought a piece of Talmud and asked a question. Let's read. All right, this is not, as you could see here in the English, this is not a translation. This is a little bit of an introduction. All right, so these words are not there in the Tanya itself. Top page 113. Let's read. The above discussion will now help us answer a question that was posed at the very beginning of the Tanya. The Tanya had questioned the oath that according to the Talmud, the soul is made to swear before it is born. And that oath reads, even if the entire world tells you that you are a tzaddik, you should consider yourself like a rasha. Interesting thing. Every soul, your soul, before you were born, made this oath to an angel. That even if the whole world tells me I'm a tzaddik, I will consider myself like a rasha. And this was problematic, since it seemed to contradict the Mishnah's clear directive, don't consider yourself to be a rasha. It's not healthy to consider yourself like a rasha. But we made an oath that we'll always consider ourselves like a rasha. So let's continue. The Tanya will now offer an answer to this question through a close reading of the Talmud's words. The oath does not in fact state that you must consider yourself an actual rasha, but rather you should consider yourself like a rasha. And it's all in one Hebrew letter, the kaf, rasha. Consider yourself like a rasha, not an actual rasha. This is like real lawyer stuff over here, no? They didn't say you should consider yourself to be a rasha. Consider yourself like a rasha. But it's a key difference. Right? I didn't say Jewish. I said Jewish. All right. No politics here, right? But okay. So here the Alter Rebbe goes. Here we're back to the words of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe says, okay, but the beinoni always wins, is always strong. But. You got to see the big picture. The Alter Rebbe is like this, and this is a run-off sentence over here, so we have to follow along, okay? But since the evil of the animal soul in the left chamber of the beinoni's heart remains just as strong as the day that you were born, your animal soul is very strong, and it continues to desire every worldly pleasure, and its evil is not diluted by an overwhelming amount of good, and it hasn't even been pushed at all from its place. Right, your animal soul didn't go on a hike. You didn't compromise your animal soul. You've got a beinoni has got a real animal soul just like every other human being. Rather, its evil remains in full force, and it only lacks the executive control that allows it to expand outward into the limbs of the body. And even that is not due to the beinoni's own merits, but only because the Blessed Holy One stands at the right hand of the poor person and assists him by illuminating his divine soul. So the Alter says, 1 second, we got to keep things in perspective over here. Even this beinoni, who's such a success story, let's just consider the facts. Your animal soul is alive and well, not compromised in the slightest. Didn't even lose any of its real estate in the slightest. And the only thing the beinoni is able to do is control it from manifesting itself in a behavior. And guess what? It's not even because of your own strength. It's only because God's there to help you. You would lose this battle if it was only up to you. So the Alter Rebbe says, let's read, that's why the beinoni is considered to be, as the sages put it, like a rasha. Rasha. The Alter Rebbe warns the beinoni, I know that you're a success story, but I want you to know there's not that much daylight between you and a rasha. And essentially, you and a rasha have the same problems to deal with. And you are just as human as a rasha. You've got the same inner demons as a rasha. And don't you dare fool yourself, deceive yourself, that you are some big saint and some big tzaddik, and that you could let your guard down, and that you are holier than thou. The Alter says, no. You're a beinoni, you're a human, and remember that. Because a beinoni, after being so successful, can you imagine if you're a beinoni for a few months? not even the slightest moment of lapsing, you could start getting you could start feeling amazing. Maybe I'm a tzaddik. Maybe I'm this good guy. Maybe I don't have problems anymore. Maybe I don't have an animal soul anymore. So the Alter comes and says, don't you dare go there. Always remember your weakness. Always remember how vulnerable you are. And that's why part of the oath is always remember you're human. You're just like a Russia. You're not a Russia, but you're just like a Russia. And that's not a derogatory statement. It's a reality check. This is not a criticism. This is not giving ourselves a hard time. This is about being very honest. This is about be real. Don't fool yourself. Don't deceive yourself. And let's continue reading. The last line of page 113. This explains the oath that is administered to the unborn soul that we cited in chapter 1, that even if the whole world will tell you that you are a tzaddik, in your eyes, you should see yourself like a Rasha. What does that mean? The Alter explains. That doesn't mean you should consider yourself an actual Rasha. If you're a beinoni, then it's another form of self-deception to say that you're a Rasha. No, you're not a Rasha, you're a beinoni. Rather, what does it mean? It means you should consider yourself like a Rasha. Meaning you're a beinoni, but you're like a Rasha. You shouldn't put your faith in the world that tells you that the bad within you has been overwhelmed by the good. For that is the level of a tzaddik. People will look at you and say, you're such an inspiring person, you're such a good person, you have a heart of gold. Look, you don't do anything wrong, you won't even hurt a fly. And they'll say, look, you're a tzaddik. And Alter says, always stand guard. Know that you're a beinoni. Know that you are just like a Rasha. Not just like, but you're like a Rasha. You're similar to a Rasha. Let's read. Rather, in your eyes, you have to see that the essence and core of the bad of the animal soul is just as strong in the left ventricle as the day that you were born. None of it has departed from you whatsoever. The Alter says you gotta remember, only a tzaddik gets to take his animal soul and gets to take the negativity of his animal soul and is able to diminish it and get rid of it and destroy it. A beinoni doesn't get to do that. A beinoni gets to control. Problem management. Right? Or controlling the problem. The problem is still there. I want you to know you are born with an animal soul. You're going to die with this animal soul. And the key to success is being so honest with yourself and being true to reality. Being a beinoni means that you are going to be a human. And by the way, this is radically comforting. You know what the Alter was saying? You're human. Accept it. You're a human with flaws. You're a human with weaknesses. You are a human with temptations that embarrass you, that horrify you. It's okay. You're human. Don't be too hard on yourself for being human. But always remember you're human. And just because you have flaws and weaknesses doesn't mean you have to act upon them. Doesn't mean you have to think about them. So the Alter is very, very much... Paulina is asking a good question. I'll get to that in a moment. The Alter is very much about saying we have to know what our expectation is and isn't. Expectation cannot be, I want to get rid of my animal soul. It's not going to happen. And we have to also acknowledge the weaknesses of the animal soul and the temptations. It's okay. It's human nature. There are certain things for human nature. We have to learn how to be a beinoni, how to control it. Okay, but the Alter concludes here with one final point, which is in a certain way even more, this is a heavy little piece over here. Even more, another sobering idea. The Alter says not only is the beinoni not capable of weakening your animal soul, but let's read, on the contrary, not only has your animal soul failed to weaken, but over time it has actually become stronger as you have employed it for eating and drinking and other mundane matters. Alter says, I got news for you. Every single time you do something that gives some gratification to the animal soul, you know what just happened? You've just fed that monster. And your little monster just got a little bit of a bigger monster. You know why? Because you just fed the animal soul. And just like every single muscle in the human body, the more you exercise it, what happens to that muscle? It grows in strength. And the Alter Rebbe says, not only does the animal soul in a beinoni remain the same, every single day it becomes larger and more emboldened and has a more emboldened appetite. So your problem is only getting bigger. Your problem is getting bigger day by day. So the Alter Rebbe is not here to chastise us. The Alter Rebbe says, I want you to be very honest with the reality here. Being a beinoni does not mean you're going to be a superhuman. You're going to be just like every other human being. So despite your successes, you have to always know your weaknesses. And only by knowing your weaknesses, you could be successful. Because if not, you're going to be so self-delusional and you're just going to deceive yourself that you're not going to be able to make any real progress. I think we see this in life. Our taste for food. Does it remain the same our whole life, or does it become more sophisticated? We all know, right? The older you get, all of a sudden our animal soul starts appreciating food a lot more than it used to. Right? So the more we go through life, this is what happens. Life by default, we don't even have to do anything wrong. Our animal soul is developing, is becoming stronger, and is becoming more of a threat. So the Alter Rebbe keeps that in mind. I'll tell you two little cute stories. There's one story of a chassid. Right? This is a story in the early 1900s, 1920s, 1930s. And there was a chassid, and he went to the Rebbe of that time. The Rebbe then was the fifth Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Dovber of Lubavitch. And he complained to him. He said, when I was younger, when I was a yeshiva boy, when I would study and when I would learn, it would inspire me, it would touch me, it would move me. And now I sit down to study Torah and I can't get myself motivated. And I study, it doesn't fire me up. And I try praying and it's so much harder. So I understand, well, what happened since I was a yeshiva boy where I was so easily inspired and in such a good spiritual zone, and now it's just so hard? You know what the Rebbe told him? The Rebbe said, I think you've eaten a few suppers in between your yeshiva days and now. You've eaten supper, what do you want? Every single time you eat you sit down for a good supper and this and that, you're strengthening your animal soul. That's the way it works. And here's another story. There's once this is a story about the Alter Rebbe. All right, our author. The Alter Rebbe had a chassid who was very wealthy, and he complained to the Alter Rebbe that he has a very hard time in his spiritual journey. It's hard for him to daven. It's hard for him to get into it. It's hard for him to learn. The same problems. It's hard to inspire himself. So the Rebbe said, "What do you think? You think eating steak for dinner and walking around in silk clothing, you think that's conducive for living a spiritual life?" The Alter was simply saying, you got to realize, life means we got an animal soul, and the passage of time itself makes the animal soul stronger. Now, so what do we do about this? There's nothing to do about it. We got to always know. We got an animal soul. That animal soul is always there. Being a beinoni does not free us from our animal soul. So what is our goal? We're going to learn about that. We have to embolden our godly soul. We have to realize that. We are, every single time we wake up, we buy ourselves new clothing, we drive a good car, we're giving gratification, we eat good food, we're giving gratification to our animal soul, we have to keep that up with our godly soul. It's the same thing. The more you feed the godly soul, the bigger the godly soul gets. So it's knowing the reality helps us understand what we need to be doing. Maybe what we've done yesterday or 10 years ago for our godly soul was good for them. But now we got to be doing more. We got to be growing. We got to also build up the muscle of the godly soul. But in any case, this is where we're holding. The Alter says that the Alter is showing us the nature of the beinoni, and that we have to know that the beinoni is always having God assisting him. And if not for God, the beinoni would falter. And that the beinoni has to always remember, you are like a Rasha. You're not a Rasha, but you're like a Rasha. You have to know you're very human and never forget that. And on this theme, we'll continue next week, God willing, as the drama continues in the rest of chapter 13. Let's do some questions. Joel, yes.
What I'm wondering is this. I don't know if I got this right. The beinoni is a separate individual from the Rasha in the respect that even though the beinoni has the animal soul, it overrides the expression of it, with the help of God.
Yeah.
Okay. But does that mean now I'm a Rasha? If I do something that's good, then that is not Rasha-like, I'm still a Rasha because I'm not doing everything else good. So my whole life is predicated on trying to become a beinoni. Is that the idea or not?
Yeah. So first of all, 2 points here. Number one, a Rasha doesn't mean you're evil. A Rasha could do a lot of good.
Okay.
That's a Rasha is simply the word that defines an internal state. It's not based on what we're doing or not doing. Yeah. A Rasha means that we allow our weaknesses to exist.
Okay, I got that.
Now that's right.
Which means that I'm probably going to be a Rasha the rest of my life. But I'm trying to be a beinoni.
It's a journey. We could be more like a beinoni. That's the goal.
Right. All right. And the final question is: do you know people that you consider a beinoni?
I don't go around asking people.
No, I'm not saying that to be funny. I'm saying that because at your position, you're more familiar with people that actually practice the religion, a lot better than some of the other of us. So I'm just wondering if in your mind you ever came across somebody that you considered in your own way, that you look at them and say that maybe that's a beinoni.
It's impossible to know.
Okay, that's what I want.
Why? Because a very big part of the beinoni, of the difference between a beinoni and a Rasha, is their thought.
Right.
But that said, I have seen people that have just been so impressive and seem to just be in such a good space internally that I could. I don't know, but it's a good guess, or I could.
Yeah, I understand. This is an internal. It's an internal. It's a soul thing. It's an internal thing, right? I understand.
Can you repeat though? You said Rasha allows their weaknesses
to manifest, to exist.
Okay, thanks.
A Rasha means you're weak. Now, it doesn't have to mean very weak, but if you allow weaknesses to take over, even for a moment in your life, that's the definition of a Rasha. The healthy balance is gone. The ideal balance is gone.
Are you Rasha forever if you do something, if you're weak once? Does that mean you are a Rasha for the rest of your life? Or the way I understood it so far is that I can change, I can become a beinoni, and that's the objective.
Right.
But how you say, if you do something bad or you let yourself go to your weakness, then I'm a Rasha.
Oh, so that's a very good question. Does that mean that one sin that I ever did ruined it for me? The answer is no. A beinoni is somebody who is in such a healthy place that for them to give into a weakness is not going to happen.
Okay.
And that is really the point where a person crosses over from being a Russia to a beinoni.
But if it happens, then he is no longer a beinoni.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he
The
will
moment there's a
forever.
weakness, that person's not a
Okay.
beinoni.
Oh,
And
okay.
you could become a beinoni again tomorrow, but you got to build up, you got to build
Okay.
up some stamina and get to that good space.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
yeah, even one thing means that you've lost the strength that defines the beinoni.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody says, I never fall asleep at the wheel besides once a year.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, once a year, I'm sorry, you got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's only once a year, but I'm sorry. Even if it's not going to be today, you're still a problem.
So it's
A driver,
basically
somebody who never falls asleep at the wheel, right? And so I'm saying it's a space where it just doesn't happen. Now, it always could happen if you lose that inspiration and you drop the ball and you start lapsing. But a beinoni is somebody who's in that space where it's just not going to happen.
okay. Yeah. Okay.
Paulina is asking her, how do we ask Hashem for help? The answer is very simple. You want to know when God helps? The second you put in the effort to help yourself. The moment you simply display to yourself, display to God that I want to do the right thing, and you put even a drop of effort, God makes it happen.
I have a quick question, or maybe it's
Sure.
not quick, but maybe we'll
Doesn't
have to
have to
talk
be
about
quick.
another time. You said the Rabbi liked the truth or sought out the truth?
The Alter Rebbe was known for having being very focused on authenticity and on truth. We'll actually talk about it a little bit by the end of the chapter.
The reason why it just resonated with me because, and you probably don't follow any celebrity trials, but like I watched the Johnny Depp one and I watched the Gwyneth Paltrow trial and I could tell who was lying. And it really bothers me when someone's doing something that's unethical and dishonest. And it's like, I really hone in on it. So it just I'm so interested in that aspect.
Yeah. But truth doesn't only mean truth versus lies. Truth means something authentic and long-lasting and deep and real versus something fleeting and cheap.
Mm-hmm.
It's
richer than just one view. Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll put it this way. This is this is a very, very fine idea. There's something called cheap inspiration. Now, cheap inspiration is still inspiration, so it's not bad. It's not a lie, but it's cheap. What makes cheap inspiration cheap? That today you're all inspired, and tomorrow morning, the inspiration's gone. And some people could live their whole life just, working off of one cheap inspiration to another cheap inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
But it works because I'm inspired, okay. So, for example, a trip to Israel. A trip to Israel is a very, very good thing. Don't get me wrong. But so you go to Israel, you get inspired, you come back home. Oh, I'm inspired. You feel good about yourself. I'm inspired. What happens a week later? That inspiration is a piece of history.
Dissipates, yeah.
Yeah. So, or there's another way of inspiration. Something that's real, something that you own, something that's not circumstantial, something that's long-lasting, something that's internalized. So would you call the inspiration from Israel a lie? No. Is it not truth? No, it is true. But if we want to be honest with ourselves, we should be owning something real.
Long-lasting. It should have a long-lasting effect.
Not an illusion.
Who we are as a person.
Exactly. Being very honest with who we are. not deceiving ourselves, not feeding a lie to ourselves. This is the Alter Rebbe was so. There's once a chassid who came to the Alter Rebbe. You want to listen? This is such a beautiful story. And the chassid would visit the Rebbe once a year. He lived in some other, he lived far away. It was a whole big trip. And at home, he was dressed like a businessman, but when he came to the Rebbe, he would dress in a Hasidic garb. One time he visits the Rebbe, and he told her, and he shows up, and he's not in his Hasidic garb, he's in his business clothing. So the Rebbe said, what happened? You always visit me, and you make sure to put on the right. He said, you know what? I decided, enough fooling you. A whole year, I dress one way. I come here, I decided I'm going to show you exactly who I am. So the Rebbe said, I thought that when you came here, this was the real you. And a whole year, you're busy fooling everybody in your town. I'm so disappointed to see that that's the real you, and that your Hasidic clothing here, you thought you're fooling me. But there was once, there's a Hasidic line that says like this: God you can't fool. Your neighbors you can't fool. They see right through you. The only one you could fool is yourself. And what's the big deal to fool a fool? Which means there has to be a lot of honesty and integrity and a search for inner truth. And that's a very big idea in you can even see that in the book of Tanya. The Tanya is such a truth-seeking book. I'll tell you something. I met, he's now a Chabad rabbi in France. A French boy, grew up not religious, brilliant kid. He was sent as an exchange student to the University of Chicago, the University of Illinois. In his young adult life, he got closer to Judaism, and he adopted Torah and mitzvahs, and then he became a shliach. He says the first time that he really met truth and integrity was when he learned the teachings of the Rebbe. He says when you learn a teaching from the Rebbe is searching for truth. He says, I never saw that before in my life. I'm 21 years old, and all of a sudden here's a man who's he really is searching for the truth. Whatever topic, he wants to get down to the bottom of it. He says that's what turned him on. That was powerful for me to hear. That resonated with me. So yeah, we're searching for the truth. We're not looking for what's cheap and convenient and works well, but we want something that's real and authentic and long-lasting, and not just smokes and mirrors. And that's a much tougher sell. That's honestly a much tougher thing. All right, have a wonderful evening, dear friends.
Thank you, Rabbi. It was a great lesson tonight.
Yes. See you all next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Take care. God bless you all. Sei gesund. Bye-bye.